The Forgotten Warehouse. Late one summer afternoon, four childhood friends, Ethan, Cole, Ava, and Madison, found themselves on a winding country road in rural Pennsylvania. They were on a spontaneous road trip, hoping to escape the suffocating routine of everyday life. The group had set out early that morning, determined to see where the roads would lead them, with no firm destination in mind. Yet, none of them could have predicted that the path would lead to an abandoned warehouse that looked like it had been plucked out of a ghost story. It all started when Ethan, who was driving, noticed a dilapidated structure tucked behind a row of towering oak trees. The building was partially hidden by overgrown vines and rusted chain-link fencing. It was the kind of place a casual traveler might overlook, but something about it drew Ethan's eye. He slowed down, feeling an odd pull. The sign above the main entrance was half missing, only the letters GRAOUSE remained, which left more questions than answers. "Did you guys see that old warehouse?" Ethan asked, slowing the car to a crawl. Cole squinted out the window, curiosity mingling with an uneasy thrill. "Yeah. I see it. Looks creepy." Ava, the ever-adventurous soul of the group, leaned forward from the back seat. "Let's check it out. When else are we going to explore a mysterious old building?" Madison wasn't so sure. She could sense a quiet foreboding in the air, and she'd always been more cautious. "I'm getting a weird vibe from this place," she admitted, though her words only seemed to fuel Ava's determination. Despite her reservations, Madison agreed to at least take a look. Ethan parked the car on the cracked asphalt of what used to be a small parking lot, bordered by waist-high grass. A large, rusted padlock dangled from the chain-link gate, but the chain itself had been severed long ago. Just like that, the barrier swung open with an eerie groan. Entering the warehouse, the group stepped inside. The building's interior was dimly lit by strands of sunlight that slipped through shattered skylights and missing roof panels. Dust particles floated in the stale air, glinting like tiny fireflies. A faint musty odor, thick with neglect, wafted through the open doorway. Rows of metal shelving units stretched from wall to wall, many collapsed under years of disuse. Some sections of the floor were strewn with shards of glass from shattered light fixtures. Despite the decay, an undercurrent of restless energy rippled through the space. If there had ever been a caretaker, it seemed no one had walked these floors for decades. That was when Ava, who had ventured ahead, noticed something peculiar: dozens, no, hundreds, of sealed cardboard boxes stacked in neat rows in the far corner of the warehouse. At a glance, they looked identical. Each was sealed with aging tape that had turned brittle and yellow. "Guys," Ava called out, "come see this." The others quickly joined her, shining their flashlights over the boxes. Cole rubbed at the thick layer of dust on one of them to reveal a date scribbled in black marker, 1978. Madison let out a low whistle. "That's over 40 years ago. Why would someone store all these boxes here and never come back?" Curiosity ignited, they began walking the aisles, shining beams of light across each stack, reading the handwritten labels, some from the 1960s, others from the 70s, 80s, all the way up to the early 90s. There was something else, a variety of names that didn't sound like they were from one family or even one company. It was as if each box was tied to a different person, a different story. Discovering the first box, they debated whether they should open one. Their internal moral compasses wavered. Was it right to pry into something that clearly wasn't theirs? Eventually, curiosity overcame caution. "I'll open just one," Cole decided, gently cutting through the old tape with his pocketknife. The sound of the brittle adhesive separating was shockingly loud in the silent warehouse. As soon as the flaps popped open, a pungent waft of ancient dust escaped, making them all cough. Inside, they found seemingly mundane personal belongings: an old leather wallet, a faded photograph of a young man and woman, a small teddy bear missing an eye, and a couple of letters with the edges worn down. A driver's license placed carefully in a transparent sleeve caught Ava's eye. It belonged to a man named George H. Sullivan, the date of birth read 1950, and the license had expired in 1976. Madison felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Isn't that the same name we saw scrawled on the side of the box?" Ethan pulled out one of the letters, scanning the contents. It was written in shaky handwriting, talking about George's plan to move across the country. The letter ended abruptly, as if someone had interrupted him mid-thought. The date was from February 1976. At first, it might have seemed innocuous, an old box of a person's belongings left in storage. But the next question was impossible to avoid. If these were normal storage items, why were they abandoned for all these decades? The shocking realization. One box led to another. Ava, enthralled by the mystery, carefully opened another. This one contained a Polaroid photo of a woman in a hospital gown, a set of keys, and an address book. Again, the name scrawled on the side, Deborah Miller, matched the name in the address book. A wave of sadness swept over them as they read the notes Deborah had scribbled. She was clearly under financial strain, and the final entry was an appointment with a divorce attorney in 1982. Cole pulled out his phone to search these names, not really expecting any results. After all, data signals were weak out here in the countryside. But to the group's astonishment, partial search results indicated that both George H. Sullivan and Deborah Miller had been listed as missing persons many years ago. News clippings from local archives confirmed it. They had vanished without a trace. Heart pounding, Ethan stepped up to a third box, dated 1989. The name on it read Stanley Rowe. Once again, as the friends tore back the tape, they discovered personal effects, an old sports jacket, a journal with pages upon pages of everyday musings, and a wedding band stuffed in a small box. Searching Stanley Rowe's name showed the same chilling result: missing, last seen in the summer of 1990. Slowly, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. Each box belonged to a person who had vanished, never to be found. Piecing the puzzle together. Why would someone gather all these belongings and store them? And more importantly, who could have orchestrated something so bizarre and, perhaps, sinister? They scanned box after box, verifying name after name against any digital trace they could find. Nearly everyone whose name was on a box had an open missing person case. The entire warehouse, hundreds of boxes, contained the intimate remnants of people who had simply disappeared. At first, the friends theorized that the boxes might have been property from a police department's cold case archives, stored and then forgotten. But none of it had markings to suggest official storage or law enforcement inventory tags. Plus, it didn't explain why the building itself was so hidden, or why no official records indicated a mass storage facility for missing persons items. Digging deeper. Time seemed to slip away as they explored further. Some boxes revealed heartbreakingly personal items: children's shoes, partially completed diaries, graduation tassels, wedding photographs. There were fleeting snapshots of lives interrupted mid-story. Many of these people had simply left home one day, never returned, and were presumed missing or dead. Ava became fixated on the journals and letters, reading as much as she could. They outlined daily life, joys and struggles, future plans, nothing that foreshadowed their owner's disappearance. Madison, unnerved by every discovery, stood on guard, occasionally peeking out the windows to make sure no one was watching them. The whole scenario felt both surreal and dangerous. While Ava was neck-deep in another box, she noticed something unusual stuffed at the bottom: a torn piece of paper with a name scrawled hastily and a 6-digit number. The name was James McAllister. The number looked like a combination or code of some kind: October 14, 63. She had no idea what it meant, but something about the urgency of the handwriting gave her goosebumps. Hidden documents. Just when the friends thought they'd seen enough, Cole spotted a heavy steel cabinet near the far wall, covered by a tattered tarp. Intrigued, he and Ethan dragged the tarp away, revealing that the cabinet was locked. The lock, however, was so old that the metal around it had rusted significantly. After some struggling, during which Ethan wedged a crowbar he'd found in one corner, they pried the cabinet open. Inside were dozens of old file folders stacked in neat order. Most were unlabeled, but a few had cryptic abbreviations on their spines. Cole lifted one folder to reveal black and white photographs of people in different stages of their lives, passport-size photos stapled to corners of typed documents. Stamped in large, red letters across many of them was the word "closed" or "deceased." Some also bore the word "unresolved" in thick black ink. As they flipped through pages, it became clear these were personal profiles, medical records, transcripts, or background checks. Some even included psychological evaluations. The earliest files dated back to the late 1950s. Many had references to employment at local mills, factories, or railroads. Others mentioned that the individuals had no known relatives or had complicated family situations. In a separate drawer of the cabinet, they discovered a bound notebook with the phrase, "Property Index," on the cover. Opening it, they saw page after page of codes matched to box numbers. Next to each code were the same names that appeared on the boxes, along with short notations like "withdrawn," "anxious," "unstable," or even "prone to violent outbursts." It appeared as if someone had compiled detailed notes about these missing individuals, everything from their mental state to their last known addresses. But why collect these details? Who had the time, resources, and cold dedication to follow hundreds of missing people, archive their possessions, then shelve them away like old library books? Theories and tensions. The discovery of the steel cabinet sent the friends spiraling into a cloud of dread. Were these boxes the trophies of a serial abductor? Or were they evidence compiled by some rogue investigator obsessed with solving disappearances? It also crossed their minds that it could have been part of an illegal ring trafficking sensitive personal data, although the oldest boxes dated back further than any typical identity theft operation. Their imaginations were running wild, each scenario more disturbing than the last. The more they uncovered, the more tangled the mystery became. Ava, who had always relished puzzles, flipped through the notebook, scanning entry after entry. Dates aligned with the periods of disappearance, but there was no conclusive pattern. Some vanished in winter, some in summer, male and female, young and old. The only consistent detail was that not a single person in those files had ever reappeared. A haunting revelation. They spent hours inside that warehouse, combing through box after box, folder after folder. The sun was beginning to sink below the horizon, and shadows lengthened across the dusty floor. The fading light gave the warehouse an even more ominous feel, yet none of them wanted to leave without some clue. Eventually, they reached the back wall of the warehouse. There, behind stacks of boxes, they found an inconspicuous door. It appeared to be locked from the inside. A little jiggling of the old doorknob revealed that the door was jammed, its edges swollen from time and moisture. With effort, they shoved it open. The door led into a small, windowless office. It was here they discovered the most unsettling artifact of all, a simple corkboard covered with photographs of individuals, pinned side by side. Each photo had notes scribbled in the margins: last seen, no family, was wearing a red coat, frequent visits to hospital. The last pinned photo was dated 1993, and the note beneath it read, "Subject acquired." That phrase sent chills racing through them. It sounded clinical, as if the people had been collected like specimens. And that was the final note ever written, 1993. After that, nothing. "Subject acquired," Ava repeated, nearly inaudible. What does that even mean? Her friends stood in stunned silence. They weren't trained investigators, they were just a group of old pals on an innocent road trip. Yet here they were, standing in the middle of a decades-long web of disappearances and unreturned belongings. Unanswered questions. The deeper they went, the more questions arose. Who was behind this operation? A single individual or an entire group? Why had they stopped in 1993? Had the perpetrator been caught or had they died? How had so many people's possessions ended up in this secret hoard, never to be reclaimed or discovered, until now? They considered what to do next. Part of them wanted to report everything to the local authorities. But would law enforcement even believe this outlandish find? And if the original orchestrator of this hoard was still out there, would they come back once they realized the warehouse had been disturbed? The friends felt a bizarre sense of responsibility to the hundreds of missing people represented by these boxes. Each dusty cardboard container was a memorial of sorts, a tragic story frozen in time. In that moment, it felt like they had uncovered a secret graveyard where the ghosts were silent objects rather than headstones. The drive to do the right thing. A sudden rush of determination washed over Madison, the one who'd been most uneasy at the start. She found herself wanting to call the police immediately. "We can't just leave this place like we found it. These are people's lives," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with passion. Cole nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we have to tell someone. It's not just about the mystery, maybe someone out there is still searching for answers. Maybe these belongings can help solve cold cases." Ava picked up a photograph of a missing teenage girl, her eyes bright with youthful hopes. "If we do this," she said softly, "I hope it might bring closure to families who've spent years wondering." Ethan exhaled, looking around at the dusty labyrinth one last time. "All right," he said. "Let's document as much as we can before we go. We have our phones. Let's take pictures, video, anything to prove what's here." Documenting the warehouse. They split up into pairs. Ethan and Madison carefully filmed every inch of the main storage space, focusing on labels, years, and the general scale of the operation. Cole and Ava ventured back to the office to capture footage of the corkboard, file cabinets, and the cryptic notes. They also snapped photos of key documents, ensuring they had enough evidence to show the authorities. While filming, they could not escape the feeling that they were treading upon sacred ground, or, at the very least, a hidden place never meant to be discovered. The combination of sorrow and macabre fascination kept them quiet as they moved. A final, chilling sign. Just as they were about to wrap up, Ava noticed something peculiar in the far corner of the office, an old metal trash can. Among its contents were scraps of paper, burnt at the edges. She noticed a partially legible handwriting that read, "Took them out, for the final time." The rest was illegible, charred to black. Ava shuddered. The phrase alone was enough to conjure terrifying scenarios. It seemed that whoever operated this warehouse had intended to destroy some documents. Had they left in a hurry? Or had something stopped them before they could finish erasing the evidence? With a trembling hand, she snapped a photo of the burned note before dropping it back into the trash can. She felt suddenly lightheaded, as if the enormity of this discovery was pressing down on her shoulders. Leaving the warehouse. The sun had fully set by the time they emerged from the forgotten labyrinth of secrets. Only a faint glow in the western sky hinted that day had ever existed. Outside, a chorus of crickets filled the air, oblivious to the warehouse's dark contents. The friends made their way back to the car, each step weighted by a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. They had the evidence, but they also had more questions than answers. Who would they call first? The local police? The FBI? And how would they explain stumbling upon a place that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of history? Madison took one last look over her shoulder at the building's ominous silhouette. She couldn't shake the sense that something, or someone, was still watching from the shadows. But the sky was empty, and the only sign of life was the steady hum of insects. The aftermath. In the days and weeks that followed, the friends faced an avalanche of investigations. They contacted the local authorities who initially treated their story with skepticism, until they saw the images and videos. Soon, county sheriffs and state investigators were swarming the property, combing through every box, every photograph, every scribbled note. Media outlets caught wind of the discovery, turning the warehouse into a sensational headline: "Forgotten Warehouse of Missing Lives, a decades-long secret finally unveiled." However, the deeper the authorities dug, the more questions arose. There were no direct links to a single suspect. All leads were decades cold. Forensic tests on the documents and items offered only minimal DNA evidence, most of it too degraded to provide a conclusive match. A swirl of conspiracy theories surfaced. Some believed a hidden cult had organized the warehouse. Others were convinced it was the collection of a single disturbed individual. Still others suspected a covert government operation gone awry. Meanwhile, the families of the missing were contacted, one by one. Some reacted with heartbreak, some with relief, and others with quiet gratitude. At least they had recovered something belonging to their lost loved ones. A few cold cases were reopened. In rare instances, new evidence breathed fresh life into long-dormant investigations. But for the most part, the warehouse raised far more puzzles than it solved. Epilogue: The Echoes of the Forgotten. Ethan, Cole, Ava, and Madison never forgot that day. Though many tried to label them as amateur detectives or urban explorers, they felt more like reluctant witnesses to a tragedy no one had bothered to uncover for decades. The warehouse eventually became a historical crime scene of sorts, roped off by bright yellow tape and guarded around the clock. Urban legends sprang up almost immediately. Locals called it the Grave of Memories, whispering that the ghosts of the missing roamed the aisles at night, searching for the items that once shaped their lives. Over time, experts visited, trying to piece together the labyrinthine threads of who had orchestrated such a massive collection. Psychological profilers speculated about the mind behind it, someone with a twisted fascination for controlling the last fragments of existence of those who vanished. But the culprit, if there ever was a single one, had left no direct trace of their identity. Rumors persisted that somewhere in the countryside, other hidden stashes of personal effects might lie waiting to be found. No one knew for certain. A chilling sense of unresolved fate hung over the entire region like fog. But for the four friends, one fact remained indisputable: they had stepped into a forgotten world, where hundreds of silent boxes told a collective story of disappearances spanning decades. They had seen firsthand the eeriness of possessions long unclaimed, and felt the collective sorrow of countless unanswered questions. In each box resided not just objects, but fragments of human lives, stories that had ended abruptly and tragically, without explanation or closure. To this day, whenever they speak of it, they feel the same shiver, as if reliving that first moment of stepping into the dusty labyrinth of cardboard boxes and sealed fates. None of them regrets calling the authorities, although they've never quite shaken the suspicion that the warehouse was only one chapter in a much larger narrative. Every so often, they meet up, sifting through photos and old notes they took, haunted by a single, unanswerable question: who brought all of these people's stories to a silent, forgotten end, and why did no one ever try to bring them home? Their discovery stands as a reminder that even in a world buzzing with modern technology, there are still places where time stands still, where secrets lie just out of sight, waiting for the right set of eyes to look closely. And if there's anything to learn from the forgotten warehouse of secret boxes, it's that sometimes the loudest echoes of humanity come from the silences we least expect, and that even in the era of constant connection, entire lives can still vanish without a trace, leaving behind a trail of objects that whisper of what once was.